Chapter 13. Physical traits of an individual are maintained because of the genes. Let us try to understand various facts about these genes in the chapter Mapping Our Genes. Observe the plants grown in a rose garden or a sugarcane field. Are the plants grown alike or do they look very different? All the plants grown in a rose garden or a sugarcane field look alike. Take the example of your class. Do all the students in your class look alike? No, all the students in the class do not look alike. Let us see what is meant by inheritance. We have already studied that reproduction is a process which gives rise to new individuals that are similar to their parents with subtle differences. Organisms that reproduce by asexual mode exhibit minor variations, whereas when the mode of reproduction is sexual, the variations are more. In this lesson, we shall deal with the mechanism by means of which variations are created and are passed on from one generation to another, or in other words, inherited. These inherited variations get accumulated in the individuals of forthcoming generations. Members of a generation inherit the characters from the members of the previous generation. This inheritance provides the general basic design of the body with some minor changes in it for the next generation. What would happen when this new generation would reproduce? The second generation would have differences that they inherit from the previous generation, and they shall also have certain newly created differences. The original organism at the top will give rise to individuals similar in body design but with minor differences. Each of them in turn give rise to individuals with minor differences. Some of those differences will be unique. Others will be inherited from the respective parents. The above figure shows how diversity is created over the succeeding generations. The organism at the top gave rise to two organisms, and each of them gave rise to two each. When we observe these 7 individuals, we see that they are all similar in body design but are with minor differences. The figure represents the situation when the mode of reproduction is asexual. In asexual mode of reproduction, the individuals produced are very similar to one another and are with minor differences because of small inaccuracies involved in DNA copying. But when the mode of reproduction is sexual, then greater diversities will be generated. This can be explained when we discuss the laws of inheritance. We have all heard of the word heredity. Let us see what is meant by heredity. Heredity is defined as the transmission of traits, physical or mental, from parents to offspring. The offspring of dogs are dogs, pigeons are pigeons, humans are humans only. Inherited traits. It is a well-known fact that offspring do resemble their parents, but yet there are many differences between them. This resemblance and difference is the result of heredity. Let us know more about Gregor Johann Mendel. Johann Mendel, July 20th to January 6th, 1884, was an Augustinian priest and scientist who gained posthumous fame as the figurehead of the new science of genetics for his study of the inheritance of certain traits in pea plants. Mendel showed that the inheritance of these traits follows particular laws, which were later named after him. The significance of Mendel's work was not recognized until the turn of the 20th century. The independent rediscovery of these laws formed the foundation of the modern science of genetics. Let us study Mendel's law for inheritance of traits. The laws for inheritance of traits in human beings are based on the fact that both the mother and father contribute equal quantity of genetic material to the child. As the contribution by each parent is equal, then what will be the traits seen in the child? Mendel worked on these lines and formulated the main laws for such inheritance. It is very interesting to study the experiments conducted by him over a century ago. Mendel's experiments were based on a number of visible contrasting characters of garden peas, Pisum sativum, like tall or short plants, red or white flowers, round or wrinkled seeds, axial or terminal position of flowers, green or yellow-colored pod, etc. Mendel chose pea plants with different characteristics, like plants bearing red flowers and plants bearing white flowers, for his experiments. He produced progeny, offspring, from them and calculated the percentages of plants with red or white flowers. Mendel's monohybrid cross. Mendel, during the tenure of his experiments, made several crosses of pea plants involving only one pair of contrasting characters or traits. Such crosses were termed as monohybrid crosses. We shall consider Mendel's cross of red-flowered and white-flowered pea plants as an example to study and understand the monohybrid cross. The parental generation P1, red-flowered and white-flowered pea plants, were used as parents for crossing, and thus they are said to be plants of P1 generation. Mendel used terms like dominant and recessive for red flowers and white flowers respectively. Dominant character is the one which masks or hides its recessive partner. Red flowers were called dominant because in the following generation all the plants were with red flowers. White flowers were termed as recessive as this character was not exhibited in the next generation. Mendel stated that the factors responsible for these traits were present in pairs. Today we call these factors as genes. Dominant genes are represented by capital letters and recessive genes are represented by small letters. As the genes occur in pairs, those for red flowers are written as RR and those for white flowers as RR. The pair factors or genes separate or segregate out during the formation of gametes in the P1 generation. Thus, two types of gametes are produced, one with R factors and the other with R factors. The following generation, that is, the generation produced by P1 generation, is called as the first filial generation or F1 generation. The first filial generation F1. Mendel observed that all the flowers of F1 generation were red in color. He realized that the red-flowered plants of F1 generation were different from the red-flowered plant of P1 generation, as the F1 generation plants had white-flowered parents. From the result of F1 generation, Mendel concluded that red was dominant over white. Though F1 individuals were bearing red-colored flowers, they contained factors for white-colored flowers too. Thus, the plants of F1 generation are phenotypically red but genotypically hybrids. The phenotype is the appearance or any detectable characteristic feature of an individual like red and white flowers. The genotype is a term that refers to the genetic composition of an individual. Thus, we can say that F1 red-colored plants are similar to P1 red-flowered plant in their phenotype but different in genotype. Red-flowered plants in P1 generation have RR genotype and thus produce only one type of gamete, R. The F1 red-flowered plant possess RR genotype and thus produce two types of gametes, namely R and R. Mendel continued with his experiments and allowed the F1 plants to self-pollinate in order to produce second filial generation F2. The second filial generation F2. The F2 generation has both red-flowered and white-flowered plants. Mendel found out that out of a total of 929 pea plants, 705 were red flowers and 224 plants were with white flowers. Thus, the phenotypic ratio is approximately 3 red is to 1 white. The genotypic ratio would be 1 RR is to 2 RR is to 1 RR, which is based on genetic constitution. Thus, it can be inferred that phenotypically there are two types of F2 plants, that is red and white flowered plants, but genotypically there are three types, namely A. F2 pure dominance, RR produced red flowers, homozygous. B. F2 pure recessive, RR produced white flowers, homozygous. C. F2 hybrid reds, RR produced red flowers, heterozygous. With the help of a table, show Mendel's monohybrid cross of tall TT and short TT pea plant. Mendel's monohybrid cross of tall TT and short TT pea plant is shown in this way. How will you find out that F1 generation has traits both for tallness and dwarfness? Answer: plants of F1 generation were tall. Tallness of F1 generation was different from the tallness of plants of P1 generation, as the F1 generation plants had dwarf parents. From the result of F1 generation, it can be concluded that tallness was dominant over dwarfness, but had traits of both tallness and dwarfness. Write the phenotypic as well as the genotypic ratios. Answer: phenotypic ratio is equal to approximately 3 tall is to 1 dwarf. Genotypic ratio is equal to 1 TT is to 2 TT is to 1 TT. Now let us study Mendel's dihybrid cross. A dihybrid cross involved two pairs of contrasting characters. Mendel continued with his experiments on pea plants. This time he crossed pea plants having round and yellow seeds with plants bearing wrinkled and green seeds. We can see that here two pairs of contrasting characters, namely seed shape and seed color, is involved. Since this experiment involves two pairs of contrasting characters or traits, it is known as Mendel's dihybrid cross, parental generation P1. Mendel obtained pea plant with round and yellow seeds and plants bearing wrinkled and green seeds. When the gametes of the P1 generation are formed, each pair of genes, RR or YY, segregates independently of the other. Thus, the RRYY plants would produce only RY gametes and not RR or YY gametes. Similarly, the RRYY plants would produce RY gametes. Thus, we conclude that in gametes, a pair of genes is represented by only one of its members, first filial generation F1. On the basis of the experiments with monohybrid crosses, Mendel anticipated that the F1 generation plants would be with round yellow seeds. His prediction was right. Though the genotype of the pea plants were RRYY, but phenotypically they were plants with round yellow seeds, as yellow color is dominant over green and round shape over wrinkled. The F1 plants are called dihybrid. The F1 plants produce 4 types of gametes. They are RY, 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 out of which RY and RY are similar to the P1 gametes, hence known as parental combinations, and the remaining 2, that is RY and RY, are termed as recombinations. When F1 generation plants undergo self-pollination, they give rise to second filial generation F2. The 4 types of male gametes and the 4 types of female gametes give rise to 16 mating combinations, which are shown in the Punnett square or checkboard diagram. The male gametes are arranged on the top of the board and the female gametes on the side. It should be noted that the proportion of different types of F2 individuals are represented on the Punnett square and not their actual numbers. Mendel produced 556 pea plants, of which 315 had round yellow seeds, 101 were wrinkled yellow seeds, 108 were round green seeds, and 32 were wrinkled green